I want to welcome everyone to our presentation that is titled Gathering Golden Eggs, How a Small Group of Hospital CEOs Are Beating Big Insurance at Its Own Game. So I'm going to start with a question, and that is, if you are tired of big insurance companies calling the shots and controlling the game and sometimes rigging the game against hospitals, especially with our employer hats on, then you're at the right presentation. We are going to walk through in great detail how a group of hospitals have banded together to try to combat that very issue. And we kind of play on this golden egg theme, if you will, a little bit, tongue in cheek, because really what they've done is they've figured out how to kind of get that goose that lays those golden eggs to work in their favor. And this is a whole new concept in one way, but it's pulling on and drawing from years of these types of programs that have existed. And frankly, this is the kind of thing that big hospital and hospital systems have been doing for many, many years. So I'm excited to be here today. I'm excited to introduce you all to my co-presenter, Jonathan Bailey. So let's move on and make that introduction. Just real quick about myself. My name is Brant Couch. I'm the CEO of HealthSure. And more importantly, I'm the CEO of the Rural Hospital Insurance of America program. This is a program that was created in conjunction with the National Rural Health Association. So we'll talk a little bit about that. My background is actually, I'm a CPA. So I call myself a recovering CPA because I'm not in that field anymore, and glad that I'm not. So I'm excited to be in insurance. My parents think I'm strange, but beyond that, I'm really happy to be here with you guys to talk about this program and share some of the success stories that I think Jonathan can speak about. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jonathan Bailey.
Thanks, Brant. I really appreciate you asking me to be part of this panel, and looking forward to sharing our story with everybody. So as Brant said, I'm Jonathan Bailey. I'm the CEO for Hanson County Hospital District, which is located in Spearman, Texas. We are at the very top of the Texas Panhandle. We are a 14-bed critical access hospital. We have a 74-bed nursing home attached to our hospital. We run a rural health clinic. We have a retail pharmacy, home health, hospice, pretty much the whole health gambit. We take care of our county. Counties consist of 5,500 people. So we're a small rural community. And like I said, in the top of the Texas Panhandle.
All right, Jonathan. Well, thanks for that background on you. And hey, thanks for playing along with me today. I know this is not your day job. You've got a hospital to run. So we're gonna get through this for the whole audience that also have hospitals to run. And we're gonna move into really the three pillars or the essential elements. I mentioned the Rural Hospital Insurance of America program just a little while ago. And all that really is an aggregation of hospitals across the country. Currently about 80 hospitals participate, and it's really helping that collective buying power, which frankly, that's what the big hospital systems have in their favor that we as smaller independent rural hospitals don't. So we know that this is a big deal that we can get together and do things. We also know that if we come together and leverage our risk and turn risk into an asset, which we'll talk about, that's another key element to this program. And then finally, that shared experience and wisdom. Jonathan, for example, being on the call today just to talk about some of his experiences. It's just a little taste of what this program is all about. And the focus today is not about this program, but it's about one of the initiatives that came out of and was born out of this whole idea of collaborating and getting hospitals together. And that's called the Community Hospital Insurance Coalition. That's what we're going to be talking about today in our presentation. But before we dive into that, I want to make sure that we touch on a point, and that's about change. We all know there's a lot of change swirling around us right now in our country, and we know that there's a lot of change that really just comes with healthcare. But all too often we see rural hospitals don't embrace change. They don't try to do anything different. They really hang on to status quo. So the rest of this presentation, we want you to get your mind, if you can, sort of open and flexible and adaptable. And we just invite you into a conversation about changing maybe the way you think and turning risk into an asset. We'll talk about that. Breaking away from the big insurance companies, we'll really talk about that. But I really like this idea of collaboration and change. And I'm actually going to start by, Jonathan, just asking you to share, just a little bit from your point of view, that as hospitals have to embrace change, go through this, maybe describe a little bit how your mindset around your insurance program changed over time.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, if you're not willing to embrace change and you're remaining stagnant, you're just gonna, stay there and wither away. So one of the things we looked at and decided to do was joining CHIC and going self-funded. And I think, if you're not at least considering that, it's a little short-sighted, especially in the times that we're in. Working towards that way, getting that benefit, taking that risk, but you also have that ability and the potential to reap the benefit instead of the insurance companies reaping that benefit. So that was one of the big reasons why, our thinking for going self-funded.
Yeah. Yeah. So for those of you kind of following along here, we're already diving into that notion of our own health insurance plan. So when we talk about beating the big insurance companies, it's as a rural hospital, you have to make one decision. First decision is, am I going to have a fully insured health plan? And I'm going to have the big insurance companies take all the risk, but they get to keep all my premium? Or am I going to self-fund my plan, take some risk and do that? And if I'm going to self-fund, how am I going to do that the most responsibly and to yield the biggest benefit? That's where we talk about turning risk into an asset. And so if you look back all the way back to the 70s, up until kind of modern day, this insurance codependence, that's a term that we've kind of coined, but really what it just means is there was little to no control. It was all price-based decisions, meaning we just suffered through whatever the increase was year after year. And the most we could really do about that was pass on costs to our employees. We know that when you shift your mindset, for those hospitals that may have already done this, and kudos to you if you have, but being a self-funded benefit program gives you a whole new world of tools, resources, and opportunities. And that is what led us and this group of hospitals that are currently in what we call CHIC, the Community Hospital Insurance Coalition, to really decide to take that even a step further and take more control into their hands and reap even more rewards. And so I'll just kind of stop there and say, Jonathan, from this point of view, kind of thinking, looking backwards, that traditional fully insured to a more self-funded program, just talking about that for a moment, what's been your personal experience and how have you all at Hansford County felt about all this?
Yeah, so all these things on this slide, especially with the risk asset management on that portion, we've tried all that. You've got to try things, see what works, see what doesn't work. But at least you have that control and you're able to do that if you're in the self-funded program like we are. One of the things that we try to do is leverage our 340B pricing through our retail pharmacy. There's other strategies on the price-based strategies with big tertiary centers. In our market didn't work, but that doesn't mean it won't work in other markets. So there's always things you just got to see what works, what doesn't work, and just be willing to accept that change and willing to move forward.
Yeah, and that's not always easy, is it?
No, it's not. It's change is hard for a lot of people, but if you have good leaders and good managers like we do, they embrace it and they help us, express that to our employees and help everybody understand. That's why we need to do it. So.
Yeah, no, leadership is a great point, and sometimes that's what it takes to get change implemented. So what we're talking about right now is specifically the Community Hospital Insurance Coalition. And your point just a second ago about leadership, that's really what happened here. What we have currently is now 20 hospitals that have joined this coalition to essentially stop renting their insurance from year to year and actually own it, so that you actually participate as members and owners of your own insurance company. And so that's not a new concept, but it's relatively new and relatively innovative, I think, for rural hospitals to step out and do that. And so I think when we talk about this, Jonathan, I was going to ask you to maybe tell a little bit of the story on how did your hospital first hear about this coalition and why did you decide to even get involved in it to begin with?
Sure. So, if memory serves me right, I was actually at a conference and talking with a fellow CEO that, I really trust and respect. And he mentioned this program to me. And we got to discussing it over dinner and really had a lot of interest in it. We're always looking for ways to, innovative ways to try to cut expenses where and when we can, especially with employee expenses, which in health insurance is one of the largest ones. So we talked with him. I got in touch with you, I believe, and got a little more information, and it kind of just went from there and took it to our board. Our board's made of cattle farmers, ranchers, bankers, school teachers. And so, luckily we have a really good board, and we've been self-funded for quite a while. So they kind of understand that whole concept. And so we had a really good conversation with our board about it and the benefits that we felt we could reap from this. And that's kind of how that happened.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm going to ask you a little bit more about probably your board in just a little bit. And I think this next slide helps touch on a few things that were probably some of your talking points to your board, I would imagine. Why would any hospital take a little bit of risk and join in this coalition? What are the outcomes you're looking for? And so greater cost control is always important. Every rural hospital, I've never met a rural hospital that doesn't talk about, we got to get our costs under control. Even those that are cost reimbursed, it's still a big deal. So whether you're critical access or not, better benefits for the employees. You mentioned that a second ago, Jonathan, that's, part of this is not necessarily a program that immediately is visible to the employees, because the coalition starts with stop loss and some of those behind the scene things. But what it does is it could free up dollars, and it creates a greater sense of maybe accountability to each other, to your fellow hospitals. So you're going to be offering things to your employees to get them engaged. And we're going to talk about wellness and other things as we move through this. Better analytics and benchmarking, knowing how your fellow hospitals are performing, that's always helpful. And then that cash return. That cash return is a big deal. And I'll go ahead and kind of reveal a little bit of the secret of this program we call CHIC. After our first year, it was highly profitable, and hospitals just like Jonathan's here have already received their first cash distribution. And so we'll talk more about that as we kind of get through this. But I want to talk about the journey and ask you a couple more questions, Jonathan. And I'll go ahead and tell you now, they may be unscripted questions, so I may throw you for a loop here. But what we have here on the left is the fully insured hospital. And you can see these webs. These are cobwebs, okay? Not spider webs like my children thought they were when they saw this graphic, but it's cobwebs, because the idea is simple. The traditional fully insured health insurance plan of renting your insurance from year to year, frankly, it's a bit stale. It's a bit stodgy. And so we know that as a hospital, you have a very unique advantage, and that is you can take care of your own people. Now, you may not be able to do every level of care, but you can do quite a bit right there in your own community and in your own facility. So right out of the gate, being self-funded opens up a whole new world of strategies and ideas. Direct contracting, that can be with a tertiary hospital, or it could be with a large employer in the region. Jonathan, you've got a neighboring hospital just down the road from you who did a big direct contract with a meatpacking plant. Those are the kinds of things that this can open the door to. Reference-based pricing. It may not work for your hospital, or it may work for your hospital. Pharmacy transparency. Now that is exactly one of the things that Hansford County's had in place for quite a while. So kind of off script here, Jonathan, I wanted to ask you a little bit about, what do you see as one of the advantages to being self-funded when it comes to your pharmacy?
Well, just having all the information at hand that you can see where that spend and who is using that spend for the pharmacy is going, and you can help manage that. We set up our plan, to really aggressively steer our employees to our retail pharmacy, to really aggressively take advantage of the 340B program. And even doing that, you're still going to have 2 or 3 employees that will drive a lot of that cost. And just having that information and being able to, you know, work with them, work with the pharmacists, the PBMs, their physicians, and see if there's other options. You know, if we weren't self-funded, we wouldn't have that option or that capability.
Right, right. And I would say, would you say too, things like the 340B and making sure that you have somebody looking at that and monitoring that? Has that been maybe one of the advantages that you've seen to this coalition being included in that? I mean, we've even had recent conversations about some of these expensive drugs and how to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, from our standpoint, we watch and monitor all that stuff too, but we also have some help from HealthSure and Chick. They're also watching it, monitoring it, and calling us and calling attention. So you've got several eyes that are watching. That is extremely helpful. And the more brains you have working on something, trying to figure out, you know, what's a better strategy or something else, the better, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. So we clearly, as we take this journey, we've talked about going from fully insured to being self-funded. And we don't know who is on the call today or watching this presentation, I should say. If you've already taken that first step, that's great. I think Hansford County took that first step long ago. But it was only until recently, as he was talking about, the idea of this coalition got introduced, and this notion of shared wisdom and collaborative data and sharing best practices and the cash return. Jonathan, you mentioned, you know, talking to your board, and you described what I think would be a pretty typical board for a rural hospital. I'm sure there's maybe some conversation about it, but they were already pretty comfortable. Anything else that you would kind of say if you were, I guess, giving advice to a rural hospital CEO that's maybe kicking around, either going self-funded, first of all, or looking into something like our program here, where they actually might want to join up with another group of hospitals? What kind of advice would you give?
Well, first of all, just, you know, explain to your boards, if we'll start with going self-funded first, you know, you're going to have access to all that information and where you're spending that money, where you would not have that information if you're fully insured. So just having that information and learning and trying to adjust to that and send, you know, patients or employees, steer them in other places to save money. And then, you know, going with Chick, if you're self-funded, you know what your max exposure is going to be. And without going with Chick, you have no ability to reap the benefits of having a good year. Now, there are going to be times you're going to have bad years, but you're also going to have good years. When you have those good years, you want to be able to reap those benefits. And that's kind of the message we got to our board was, you know, if we don't do this, we don't have that ability to reap the benefits. But if we do, we can.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good point. And I think we'll get into that more and more as we get through this presentation on what that means, what kind of benefits we're talking about that you can reap. I'll quantify that for everybody. This last little piece of the journey, this is something that is near and dear to my heart, and we've seen it play out in a couple of different ways. But across the country, you probably have heard of the concept of a narrow network, which is a term that we don't really love. But the idea of a custom network is where you get groups of hospitals in a region to partner with tertiaries and then to partner with local employers. This is what I call sort of that holy grail of where this can all go. And we at HealthSure have been talking to groups of hospitals and pockets of hospitals around the country about this concept for a while. And it's just something that I think is everybody's got their eye on it. And there's, you know, 10 different ways to do this sort of thing. One of the ways we're seeing it play out is just direct contracting. So getting one or two rural hospitals in a region to reach out to a tertiary hospital and say, hey, would you work with us? Would you cut a deal with us so that we can steer our employees to your facility, and in return, you give us a deeper discount than you would to the typical Blue Cross or Humana or United kind of contracted deal. And so far, we're seeing some success there. Now, Jonathan specifically has not been in that position yet, but there's enough hospitals that are in Chick and in his region that I guarantee you that's next on the docket for us to start talking about. How do we go back to these tertiary facilities who really are our brothers and sisters in caring for people on the front line? How do we get them to really work with us? Sometimes it's not easy, as Jonathan knows, to get them to come to the table. And we had a good run there for a while using reference-based pricing to really reap some of those benefits. But there's times where that's not going to work. So we have to always be coming up with new strategies and techniques to make that stuff work. And so I'll stop there and get off my soapbox, but I know Jonathan and others have heard me talk about this ad nauseum and at other conferences. So let's talk a little bit about how CHIC works. And I'm going to do this part, Jonathan, and then I may ask you a couple of questions as we kind of fly through this. But
sounds good.
Anybody that's self-funded already, you know that the basic concept that as an employer, you have to take the first level of risk. And in this example, we call it the self-funded retention, the SFR. And so the self-funded retention in this example here is for a hospital that chose $50,000. So that'd be $50,000 per individual for the life of the plan for the year. And they would take the first $50,000 of risk. Well, in a traditional stop-loss situation, once that claim, and in this example, a $600,000 premature birth, let's say it's a big claim, okay? Well, in a normal situation, you would submit to the reinsurance company and they would reimburse you back the $550,000. And in this example, we're using Berkeley Life and Health. That happens to be our carrier partner for the CHIC program. And it would stop with number 2. So if you go around the little wheel here in clockwise position, it would stop at number 2 where Berkeley reimburses. Plain and simple, that's how self-funding works. The difference with the coalition is we go now over to the group captive. And what happens is the group captive actually reimburses Berkeley for $225,000 of that risk. So 2 important things here to know. The captive took $225,000 of the risk of this one claim. That's the job of the captive, and you'll see in just a second, that is truly the layer of risk this captive, this Community Hospital Insurance Coalition actually takes. The other thing to note here is, notice Berkeley was not on the hook for the whole loss. The captive reimbursed Berkeley for a big chunk of that. So that's really key. So let's keep an eye on that as we move through this next example. So if we, in this example, had 5 different employers or rural hospitals, obviously we have many more in CHIC right now, but just for illustrative purposes, each one can have their own self-funded retention, their own SFR. They can have that own layer of risk that they choose to take. And in each time there's a claim that exceeds that, you can see that the group captive layer in the middle, this is our little sandwich example, working our way from the bottom up, that the group captive will take that $225,000 of risk. Well, Berkeley retains the rest, and that's where the rest of the risk goes. That happens on each individual claim. So the big catch is here, do we have enough money seeded into that group captive layer to pay for all the claims in a year? And sneak preview here, after year 1 and well into year 2, our captive performed great. And we're going to talk about that as well. But I'm going to stop actually right there. Actually, I'm going to hold on this slide for just a second. And Jonathan, I got a sort of a question for you. And this is, again, unscripted, but the risk that your hospital chooses to take, and y'all have actually chosen to take a little more risk in return for a lower premium this coming year. That's one of the choices that y'all are making. How would you coach another group of hospitals or a hospital CEO on how to get comfortable taking risk and how much risk to take? How do you go through that thought process?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you got to take a little bit of risk in order to reap any more benefits. And we've been doing this. I've been there for 10 years, and so my CFO has been with me for 4, and we kind of go back and forth and talk each other through that. On do we want to take a little more risk? Like we upped, like you mentioned, we just upped our SFR from 45 to 60. We felt comfortable doing that. Got our premiums a little bit lower. We're struggling and need to find every opportunity reduce expenses. And this is just one way to do that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think in this we're recording this, in August of 2020. We can't ignore what's going on around us, and so we want to make sure we address that head on. This was not a program that you made a decision 2 years ago to get in, and now you're nervous about it and you're looking to jump out. I mean, I think for you guys, Jonathan, would you say that this is a decision that, assuming that it's working, it should be a long-term strategy, whether we're in a pandemic or not? Is that fair to say?
Oh yeah, that's absolutely fair to say. I mean, we are in it for the long term. In my opinion, I think the program's been great for us. Like you've already alluded to, we've already had one good year, and the second year is looking up. Had we not been in this program, we wouldn't have had reaped those benefits.
Well, let me just explain real quick how the sort of the breakdown works of how the program works, and what Jonathan's alluding to here. There's good years and bad years, and so we're going to talk about the notion of a break-even year. And so what that means is, if a group of hospitals got together, and these are relatively close to real numbers when we first pro forma'd this whole program, was the group of hospitals was spending about $5 million in stop loss premium. Okay, that's the $5,017,980 right here at the top. What's happening now that's different, fundamentally, before joining the coalition, Jonathan's hospital and all the others, when they paid their premium to their stop loss carrier, that was it. They paid it to the stop loss carrier. They never got a penny of that back. That stop loss carrier took that risk and kept that money. What's fundamentally different about this program is the term policy expense. This now describes exactly, out of that $5 million, how much is the stop loss insurance company getting to keep? Do they get to keep all $5 million? Not anymore. You can see it's significantly less. Now they got to keep some because they're taking some risk. They're also administering the program. They're also doing a lot of other things, and all the people that are involved in captive management. But all of that is loaded into this policy expense, and you can see it's a fraction. Now, like we said before, everybody's self-funded retention can be what they want it to be. In fact, every rural hospital in this program has a different plan design. Not a single one of them is the same. So they still, Jonathan, for you still get to customize your plan design exactly how you want to. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, that's absolutely correct.
And I think it would be safe to say no two rural hospitals are exactly the same. No two communities are exactly the same. Is that fair to say too?
That's absolutely fair to say, yes.
So that gives some flexibility right there. But as we move down that captive layer I was referring to earlier, notice that the delta, that is what is seeded into that captive layer. That's the money that's there to pay any claims that hit that captive layer, that $225,000 of risk per claim. Well, those can add up over the course of a year. Well, in this break-even scenario, we're just showing, well, if every dollar was spent that was seeded into the captive, then there would be no need for collateral, which I'll talk about in a second. And the actual cost to you was still the full $5 million. You didn't pay any more. You didn't really win anything, and you didn't really lose anything. That's what a break-even year looks like. Now, collateral. This is something to point out, and we're not going to get into the weeds too much. But because we're asking the Berkeley to take on all the additional risk for every claim that exceeds that $225,000 over every hospital's SFR, then there's got to be a little skin in the game for the captive. And that little amount of skin in the game is called the collateral. So it is a small portion, a very small portion of the total ceded premium that goes into the captive that every hospital puts in what I'll call escrow. It's still an asset on your balance sheet. It's still your money. We call it, it's actually a subscriber savings account. And it sits there for that rainy day where we might have a situation where the captive underperforms and we run out of money. So going into this, every hospital knows exactly to the penny what they're putting at risk in the event of a bad year. And so, Jonathan, I was going to ask you about this. I was just thinking, I assume your board asked the question like, okay, What happens if this thing goes belly up? How did you explain collateral to your board?
Pretty much how you've already explained it. That so we know what our premiums were going to be, whether we're in the CHIC program or not. And in order to have that opportunity, I've talked about that a lot already, opportunity to reap the benefit of having good years, the most we were going to be out was the collateral that we had to put up. So if we had a bad year, we would be out that collateral. And so we knew what our max exposure was. And so that helped them, become more comfortable with it. We weren't going to have our premiums and then be out like another $1 million if we had a really bad year. The max exposure we had was our collateral. And so that's kind of how I explained it. And
Yeah. And I think too, I don't know if your board, you said you had a banker on your board. A lot of bankers have heard of captives. They've been around a long time. And most captives that are out there, especially the big hospital systems that are in them, there is an unlimited liability that you're exposed to. They don't always have that collateral maximum feature. When we put our program together, we knew rural hospitals couldn't sustain this unknown cash call that could eventually come to roost. And there's plenty of captives out there where that can happen. Even captives for professional liability. There's many states around the country, I know rural hospitals that participate in those for their professional liability. And frankly, in a lot of those, it's an unlimited liability. So that collateral is a key point. So thanks for sharing that. Well, on this next column, this shows an example of a high performing captive. So the biggest difference is look at the captive layer, the 2.533 million. That in this example, that's all the captive had to pay out. So we put 3.1 million in, but we only had to pay out 2.5. So we made money. And so the actual cost, because it gets distributed back, is truly only 4.3, not actually 5 million. So this is an example of what it can look like. And frankly, this is what it did look like after our first year. Now, in the example we just talked about, what's the worst case? Notice the collateral. So in this example, the collateral, when everybody pitched in their little portion of collateral, it added up to 632,000. So I illustrate this just to say, if we have a situation where that happens, where, okay, we spent all 3.1 of our captive layer, and the losses exceeded that by another 632,000, that's all our collateral that we put up. What happens then? Well, the answer is Berkeley, the stop loss carrier partner, they're on the hook. They're on the hook for every penny after that. So I think we've really touched on this really well, and I want to get to this slide and show performance. So this second prior look back and first prior look back, if you're looking from left to right across the screen, this is showing 2 years prior to 2018, had this same group of hospitals been in, the ceded premium, the blue line, was greater than the captive losses, which means we would have been profitable. Then that first prior look back here, you can see that the orange line is significantly less than the blue line, equaling that projected loss surplus. That was even greater. Now we move to 2018 and look what happened in 2018. We really hit the nail on the head that we're ending up our year at somewhere around 700 to 750,000 in total surplus, of which a chunk has already been distributed. So Jonathan's hospital and all the other hospital by the end of the year will be receiving their second round of distributions, all based on the 2018 year. And so now we look at 2019, we know it's developing well, it's too early to tell, but there's definitely a lag here. And I guess I would just say, Jonathan, because there is a lag, is that something that you get worried about? I mean, you got to wait to kind of see how claims develop, or do you feel like that's just kind of part of the deal and you understand it and your board understands it?
I think it's just part of the deal. And we understand it pretty well, and the board does too. They understand, lag and claims and stuff like that. But you still have a pretty good idea, I feel like, by looking at this one slide, I look at this and think, man, we should have done this 2-3 years ago because we really missed out on those savings 2 years ago by not being in here.
So our program runs on a policy year and a fiscal year of October 1 to October 1, which now that I say that out loud, another point is a lot of hospitals have calendar year benefits, but the stop loss can run on an October 1. And one of the greatest benefits, especially to those on calendar year benefits and enrollments, and they're trying to figure out what their contributions need to be for their employees and all that jazz, is you know what your stop loss renewal is going to be 90 days to 120 days in advance of that actually happening. The remainder of our presentation, we're going to go through pretty quick because we're getting a little short on time. But this is the message that Jonathan, I think, has shared about their own experience, is that when hospitals collaborate, when they come together, they share a little risk, it can work. And in this case, it does work. Everything else after that, in some regards, is what I'd call gravy. All this joining together for best practices, for shared wisdom, for all the cool things you can do when you come together, that's what the rest of this presentation is about. And so right here in front of us is the CHIC Wellness Platform. So part of the benefits. Now, Jonathan, you play two roles. You wear the hat as the CEO of Hansard County, but you also sit on the board of the coalition. And just this year, you all had to come together and talk about what are the things that we're going to implement as a group that are going to be good for our people, but also good for our wallets. And the wellness program, just wanted to ask you to chime in real quick on how did that conversation go with the other board members, and you were involved, and we had what are called our health risk management committee that got together. We did weeks and weeks and weeks of due diligence to try to find the right partners. How would you describe that conversation, and what was the reaction from all the other members when y'all decided to implement a wellness program?
I think everybody on that call, and I mean, every CEO understands the benefits of having a wellness program. Of course, when you get a phone call with a bunch of hospital CEOs, everybody has different ideas and different opinions. And so we took all those different ideas and opinions and thoughts and when we were looking at the different wellness platforms. But the bottom line is, as CEOs and employers, and as the insurance companies, we all understand that having healthy employees is going to, reap benefits long term. That is the best thing that we can do to help reduce our costs, is having healthy employees.
Well, and we also talked a lot with that health risk management committee, which was a group of hospital executives that helped us make the decision on what we're going to do. The biggest thing I hear from them and other hospitals I talk to all the time is we've got to engage our high risk, high cost people on our plan. They're the people that are costing us the most money. So how do we do that? And that's exactly what this is designed to do. It's designed to identify those people, and it's designed to then roll out coaching and roll out programs that make sure that they're compliant and they're doing what they need to do to stay as healthy as possible. We know that true coaching, not just a portal, not just an app on your phone, but actual coaching that goes beyond just digital tools, that's what this slide really, in these three categories, makes the difference. So the difference we're showing is we know that just based on research and data, that just digital tools can work at 20% for tobacco, a 52% adoption engagement rate on diabetes, and another 20% on obesity issues. But if you're actually engaging in coaching and reaching out to those people and have them on a regimen of actual live human beings, helping them that are trained in this, look at the percentages, how those go up. So we know that the outcomes can be better. We also know that you've got to be screening your people. Now, this is something Hansford County's been doing for a long time. And I like the way you guys do it. Remind me, there's something about their birthdays or something. Remind me what that is, how you do that.
Yeah, so every employee in their birthday month is eligible to come and have those screenings. So we'll run cholesterol, glucose, all the screening labs. And we do that at no cost to employees. And then we ask them, follow up with their PCP to go over the results. But yeah, in order to kind of manage that, and instead of having everybody come, let's say in August, we decided to go with the birthday month. So if it's your birthday month, you can go to registration and they know to do that and let you go get those screening tests done. Yeah,
that's what more fun can you have on your birthday than going to get a physical screening exam? But it's the takeaway from that is it's up to the hospital to decide what works for you. That's back to each community is different. And so every hospital can do this any way they want. They can outsource it and have a third party vendor come in and do it. That's available. You can do it yourself because you're a hospital. The key is getting that data and starting to capture that information and putting it into action. And so I'll stop right there and just say there's a whole lot more about wellness we could talk about, as we all know, but doing something is better than nothing, we know, in the long term, and getting that data and getting that going, that was a big deal to the CHIC board and to the Health Risk Management Committee. The other big deal was RX cost management. And I'll just touch on this real quick and then we'll move to the end because we're getting a little short on time. But we know, and you know, every hospital that's on this presentation right now, watching and listening, you know that the cost of drugs is going up. And you know that whether you're a hospital or some other employer, there's a lot of that you don't have control over. But we know that because it's becoming such a big part, we've got to actively attack that. And because you are a hospital and there are some things you can do about it, we need to be able to protect that pricing, that formulary, make sure it's structured correctly, make sure that you're looking at 340B in every way you can get every specialty drug through 340B pricing available to you, whether it's through your own pharmacy, whether it's partnering with a pharmacy. And a lot of these 340B vendors have so much data and information we can plug into and get more out of. We just got to be marching towards that. Rebates, that's a hot topic. We got to make sure that we understand that that's an option. Not every hospital is going to want to have those rebates. It may not win that game, but if you don't have that option, then you're just not looking at the whole picture. And then just somebody to help you quarterback all this. That's key. And so for us, we have a consultant that works with us now full-time just on our CHIC program to target the PBMs that are going to do the best job, renegotiate any of those terms, leverage our group buying power together, and get that financial comparison so that we have something that we can validate and look at and know, hey, are we really optimizing our pharmacy benefit management and all our RX? So as we wrap this baby up, I want to talk about health risk management because we have a health risk management committee. Now, Jonathan serves on our board, but he also, like every other member, is able to join one of our many committees. And that's the power of that collective thinking and going this together, not going this alone. But in front of us right now is just this myriad of ideas, and I would call it sort of the buffet of options and ideas that CHIC, as a board, as a collective, are going to be looking at these every single year. And just because our program chose to do things like wellness, pharmacy analysis, and even something called a no new laser contract provision, even though our group decided to do that all in 2020, doesn't mean that we're not going to do more in 2021 or 2022. This is a marathon and not a sprint. And so I would just, Jonathan, I would ask from, wearing both hats, where do you see this whole thing going with this, with the CHIC program and where it can go?
Oh, I think the potential is unlimited. You have all these different ideas and thoughts here on this slide, and certainly we haven't tried every single one of them, but I could pick a few of those out that we have tried and to see how they work. And when we're not afraid, and we're definitely willing to try as many of these as we can to reduce those expenses and make this thing work even better than it already has.
Yeah. I really, the potential is great, but it's got to be systematic and it's got to be well thought out. And so I think when you get a bunch, like you said, more brains in the room are better than one. The more ideas we get from each other and share those ideas and do this together, just the better off we're going to be.
Absolutely.
So that is our time. We are here at the end. We're staring at our golden eggs and our pile of cash. Jonathan, I think it's best to wrap up, and we'll take questions from the audience at the end of this presentation, of course, and be available to do that. But any final thoughts or that you want to share about the program or your experience with it?
The experience has been great. I mean, we couldn't be happier with it. I just, would like to express, especially as I mentioned, in these uncertain and unprecedented times, we've all got to be willing to look at different and innovative ways to reduce expenses. And I truly believe this is one of one of the better ways to do that. Just ask everybody to, at least give it a shot and think about it. And we've got to embrace change.
Yep. Yep. Well, I think that sums it up great. And obviously, HealthSure, as the RHA, the Rural Hospital Insurance America program manager, we're here to walk any hospital through this program. We do a lot of educating on this. And hopefully, this presentation was just a start for you. You can learn a lot more at rhaprogram.com and get access to all our other programs, including the Community Hospital Insurance Coalition. So thanks to everybody for joining us, and we appreciate your time.